McCarthy just named you to help lead negotiations with the Senate National Defense Bill. What are your major priorities headed into negotiations?
Well, I'm very thankful that he asked me to be on the conference. It's a very important conference. It's a combination of House members and senators that come together to negotiate and hammer out the final version of the National Defense Authorization Act. What I'm looking to do on that conference is to be able to make sure that the Hyde Amendment stays in, because no federal dollars should be paying for abortion. Another important piece is to fight to make sure that none of the military funding is paying for transgender surgeries. That just doesn't belong in the military, and it should not be negotiable. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that all the good things that we put in the NDAA, like the pay increases for our military members, stays there. All the good benefits that they get through health insurance, but also the buildup that we need to do for our military in replacing equipment and weapons. Think about how much equipment and weapons were abandoned in Afghanistan by Joe Biden. The most important piece to me, and it's my red line in the sand, is fighting to remove any funding to the Ukraine war. That's what I've been speaking about for months and months, and actually from the beginning of the war. I'm one of the only members of Congress that has never voted to send any money to Ukraine. I've been against this war the entire time because America's only position should be peace. And I'd like to point out an important fact that most people don't know. If anyone goes on the Department of Defense website, the mission is clear, and they say what their mission is. Number one, to deter war. Number two, to protect our nation's national security interests. The Ukraine war does neither one of those. And so funding in the National Defense Authorization Act to a war in Ukraine, which is really a proxy war with Russia, that enables war, it increases war, and it creates war, does not deter war. Secondly, it doesn't protect our nation's national security interests. It actually puts all of us at risk as we get closer and closer to World War III. So on that conference, I'll be doing everything I can in that room to convince my colleagues in the House and the senators on the other side of the Capitol that we need to stop funding a war in Ukraine.
So how close are we to a World War III if this keeps down this path? Because I do hear people saying, including yourself, this could lead to that. But I think the American people are like, okay, should we be bracing for impact? What's going on?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's a question that a lot of Americans have. For example, I had quite a few amendments that we voted on last week, but they all failed. One of them was to stop cluster munitions from going to Ukraine. That's something Joe Biden wants to do. Cluster munitions are very dangerous bombs that can kill. They have a wide range of explosion, but they also have a dud rate, meaning that they can fall and land in a place, never explode, but maybe explode years later, killing innocent people. My amendment failed, unfortunately, but 120 countries have banned cluster munitions, as well as our own Congress has banned cluster munitions. But Joe Biden signed a waiver to send them anyways to Ukraine. Another couple of amendments I had was one to block F-16s from being sent to Ukraine. Another one we talked about was stopping long-range missiles from being sent to Ukraine. And so just for a comparison, China now has a military base on Cuba. Cuba sits 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Now, let's talk about how we would feel if China put long-range missiles on Cuba that could fire into the United States. That's what sending long-range missiles to Ukraine is. It's the same thing. And so we are inching dangerously and dangerously because what we're doing is we're basically creating a war against a nuclear-armed nation, and that's Russia. And that's why it's dangerous for all of us.
So shifting a little bit, the House passed a measure that cuts off Pentagon funding to entities like NewsGuard that engage in censorship. Do you think that will make the final bill as it holds to the president's desk?
It absolutely should, because as members of Congress and senators, we should do everything we can to protect Americans' First Amendment. And we should not fund any organization or department in the United States that has censored Americans. So I'll be fighting for that to stay as well. But we'll see how we come out on the other side.
What does that say about Democrats if they were to try to nix that from the bill? and their goals for the American people?
Well, I think Democrats have shown us a proven track record of censoring Americans. That's what they did over the past several years, but that's also what they did with the Hunter Biden laptop story. They hid that one as well, using the FBI, the CIA, the DOJ, working with social media companies and the media to completely suppress and quiet that story down. And I'll argue that really had an effect in the 2020 presidential election.
And so you endorsed Trump for president again. What is the likelihood that he is the nominee, do you think?
He is 100% going to be the nominee, and I've been saying that from the beginning. Even when people were saying it was over for Trump, when people were saying it's going to be Ron DeSantis, when people were running away from Trump, especially in the early days after January 6th, I was still out on the front line saying it's going to be President Trump. He's going to be the only one that the people will elect in the presidential primary, and he's going to be the only one we need back in the White House to help save America.
And so about the White House, some cocaine was found there. What is the likelihood that we'll find out whose it is?
Well, I'll tell you, I had a classified briefing with my oversight members with Secret Service. And I don't think we'll ever find out whose cocaine it was in the White House, because the day we had the briefing just this past week, Secret Service told us they were closing their investigation the very next day, and they had no idea who it is. They have a list of approximately 500 individuals that they have as a potential suspect list, but I asked them, I said, are you going to drug test any of these people? They said, no, we're not. How are we going to do that, ma'am? And I said, well, most Americans have to undergo like a drug test just to get employed or as a routine part of their employment. Athletes have to go through drug tests to be on a sports team. Drug tests are common, but they're refusing to drug test any of these people. They're refusing to do anything with like fingerprints and things like that. So I think it's really a shame. None of us will ever find out whose cocaine it is. But I think the first family should submit to a drug test. And if anyone has an issue with that, I'm fine. I'll do a drug test too. But I'd like to see Joe Biden. I'd like to see Hunter Biden and the first family and all of the White House staff do a drug test.
And so some other news that broke today was that Fauci allegedly did know that there was gain-of-function research going on at the Wuhan Institute. What is some recourse that could take place, and do we have infrastructure in place to prevent some of these COVID-time abuses in the case that a pandemic happens again or some other related crisis?
Well, I serve on the COVID subcommittee. It's a special committee on oversight where we're investigating everything to do with COVID. And yes, it's true. Dr. Fauci knew all about gain-of-function. As a matter of fact, many of them did in the National Institute of Health. And they knew this, and they had email exchanges leading up to the story that came out on proximal origins, where they lied to us. That's where the doctors came together and they announced that, oh, this didn't come out of the Wuhan lab. This came from a bat, just naturally occurring at the wet market in Wuhan. Well, all of us know that's a lie. Even the CDC director, the then Robert Redfield, who was CDC director, said, no, this came from the Wuhan lab. But on our COVID committee, we are leading up to eventually have Dr. Fauci come in. But we think it's important to talk to everyone else first before we talk to him.